Hey everybody, Tim Albrecht here, and thank you for listening to the YFP podcast, where each week we strive to inspire and encourage you on your path towards achieving financial freedom. This week I had a chance to welcome back onto the show David Bright and Nate Hedrick, co-hosts of the YFP Real Estate Investing podcast. During the interview, David, Nate, and I talked through 5 common objections to getting started in real estate investing. Now, if you've been interested in learning more about real estate investing and have yet to pull the trigger to take that first step, this episode is for you. Some of my favorite moments from the show include hearing David and Nate talk about why investing in real estate doesn't have to be a huge demand on your time, how to learn and benefit from other pharmacist investors without getting paralyzed by the comparison game, and how to get the ball rolling with a team to support you in achieving your real estate investing goals. Now, before we jump into the show, I recognize that many listeners may not be aware of what the team at YFP Planning does in working one-on-one with more than 240 households in 40 plus states. YFP Planning offers fee-only, high-touch financial planning that is customized for the pharmacy professional. If you're interested in learning more about how working one-on-one with a certified financial planner may help you achieve your financial goals, you can book a free discovery call at yfpplanning.com. Whether or not YFP Planning's financial planning services are a good fit for you, know that we appreciate your support of this podcast and our mission to help pharmacists achieve financial freedom. Okay, let's jump into my interview with David and Nate. David and Nate, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So you guys have been busy with the YFP Real Estate Investing podcast and other happenings geared toward pharmacists on their real estate investing journey. We're going to get an update from you guys on those efforts towards the end of the show. But I want to jump right into today's topic, which is some main objections to investing in real estate. I continue to hear from many pharmacists that are interested in exploring real estate investing further. Many folks that say, hey, I want to get involved. I understand how this can help me achieve my long-term goals, diversify my investing plan, but ... there are reasons, objections, things that are getting in the way of them moving from that step of learning to actually taking action with that first property. So we're going to talk through some of those common objections today on the show. So David, one of the most common things that I hear, I suspect you guys hear all the time, we'll call this objection number 1, is I don't want to unclog toilets at 2 a.m. Or if we broaden this out a little bit further, maybe I don't have the time and to some degree the expertise to be in the weeds on actually overseeing and managing properties, but I realize the potential that's there as an investment. And as I mentioned before, potentially diversifying my portfolio. So talk to us about this common objection and fear of really being in the weeds on these properties and the time that it can consume.
Yeah, it's a super common objection. And I think that it was one of the things that almost scared me off as well, because I am not handy enough to handle most things in my own house, let alone to be responsible for another house if I'm the one that has to go out there and be handy with those things. So for me, I think what got me over this hurdle personally was understanding that it didn't have to be me to do all those things, that I just had to make sure that there was someone that could do those things. And there were people that could be hired to do those things. I know one of the things that we talked about, Tim, you and I, back at YFP episode 167 of the podcast, was that hiring a property manager was just huge for me, taking 95% of the work off my plate in that process. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, at that point, I was trying to rent out a property, trying to be my own property manager, trying to do it all. And I was unsuccessful at doing it. A property manager came in, had the place rented out super fast, and was able to rent it out so much more per month than I thought was possible. In that the property manager's fee was entirely covered just in that spread of like what I wasn't even able to get. So ended up saving me money and saving me time. It was just one of the best decisions that I've made when it comes to real estate investing. And then by doing that, the property manager handles any 2 a.m. toilet clog, or the furnace is out, or the roof is leaking, or any of the like really scary things. Like that no longer becomes my responsibility to take that call and to figure out what to do. And again, that has just been a huge help.
And Nate, I know you have property local to you, and then you have property not local to you. So, you know, I think that this gets into a little bit of maybe some of the value as well as challenges of more that distance real estate investing. But, even as you look at your property local to you, where maybe there's that urge and temptation of, hey, I could just go take care of this, right, and not have to pay 8, 9, or 10%. That option's not even on the table, right? When you look at properties that are not near to you, and that even forces the hand further in having a model that depends upon property management here we're talking about, but also just a larger system in place to manage your properties.
It's been a really nice way for me to build a business and a portfolio, because you're right. It lets me see both perspectives and both sides. It's funny. We're actually in the middle of buying another property here locally, and my challenge for myself, and more importantly, my challenge from Kristen, is to not go over there and do stuff. And, like, I can paint a room, I can change a light fixture, I can do some of the basic stuff that I know if I hire it out, it'll get done better and faster. But like, it costs $200 or it costs $500. So like the challenge for me is going to be to not do that stuff. And I've shown myself with the out-of-state investing that like it can be done, and it can be done profitably. You just have to set it up that way from the beginning. So I completely agree. Like, this is a challenge I hear all the time, or an objection I hear all the time, but you can do that as much or as little as you'd like to.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to, what are some of the goals that folks have around, their potential portfolio into the future? How involved do they want to be? And I think both of you have done a great job. I'm thinking of several webinars that you've done with Pharmacist, and certainly I've talked about in your own show as well, of really building out your model and even the financial model to, from Jump Street, account for property management fees, to account for some of these other things, that realizing your time is valuable, right? We have many busy pharmacy professionals that, again, maybe have an interest in real estate, but don't want to be unclogging toilets at 2 a.m., which, by the way, who came up with that saying, right? Because I feel like that has been the reason probably why so many people have never gotten started and involved, the 2 a.m. toilet clogs. I'd be curious to know how often that actually even happens. So.
Never happened at my house, so I don't know. Now I'm just jinxing myself, though.
Yeah, tonight, right? It's going to be a thing. Nate, the second common objection, I think about is, especially if someone's able to get past the, hey, I could never be responsible for another home, or, that 2 a.m. toilet clog issue, is I just don't know where to get started, right? It's so overwhelming. There's so many different options. Even if I listen to the YFP Real Estate Investing podcast, like, my gosh, there's a ton of different ways to get going. And I just don't know where and how to get started. Talk to us through this.
Yeah, I mean, especially with all of the different promotions from individuals in the community right now, between vacation rentals, long-term rentals, people that do college flipping or college housing, then there's just general flipping like we see on TV, or commercial properties and self-storage and house hack. I mean, like, the list goes on and on. It's just crazy. And so to say I want to invest in real estate and not have an idea of what that looks like, I completely understand how that's overwhelming. And so that's why, we really try to encourage this on the podcast. And I've talked to a lot of individuals where you just go for that kind of the least glamorous, most boring approach. And that's the long-term rental. And I'm not saying this is a fit for everyone, but it's a really great way to just kind of get in there, try real estate investing, and figure out how to set and forget it. Let the property manager handle it, or build up your system to handle it, and just let things kind of progress from there. Now, again, that's not a fit for everybody, but what I encourage you to do is to learn a little bit about each different option, see the pros and cons, and then once you dial into one, just learn that, stick with it for a while before you start branching out, because it's super easy to try to evaluate everything and get completely lost in the weeds.
David, talk to us more about, for you individual, Nate alluded to this as well, of the approach towards the long-term rentals, kind of the buy and hold strategy. And that certainly is one of many different pathways that folks may go. You've been at this for a while. Why has that strategy really been at the forefront of your plan?
Yeah, I think for us, one of the just values that we had is that we didn't want real estate investing to feel like it was taking over our world and became our everything, and sucked every last minute out of every last corner of life. And so that made the long-term buy and hold with a property manager managing things, with me not out there painting and doing whatever else, that made that a really good fit. Mm-hmm. There's certainly other things that are enticing, like vacation rentals and self-storage and other things like that, but it was just a much simpler start in the long-term rental space. So I think the other thing that's nice about that, though, is that early on, when there was a little bit more time and sweat equity was, something that we were able and willing to throw in there, earlier on, that was a great fit. And I was able to go out and paint and do things and help that process move a little further forward. But the long-term rentals have this ability for you to do some of that if and when you want to, and then back off of that if and when you want to. And so just from lifestyle and all of that really helped that to be a fit for us. And then to Nate's point too, once you get started in that space and you start to get good at it, the second and the third and the fourth become so much easier for acquiring those rentals or whatever that is, because it's getting that first property that's the hardest step.
And that's what I love, and we'll come back to this here in a little while. I love what you guys are doing with the none-to-one coaching program, right? Because, from my experience, and I think certainly from your guys' experience working with other pharmacist investors, many folks that, hey, this is top of mind, but I just can't, get over some of the hurdles, some of these objections that we're talking about here today. So, obviously once you start to align what strategy of real estate investing fits best with you individually, as well as your financial plan, getting over that first hump, and then obviously building the confidence to continue to snowball further. And I think you guys have done an awesome job on the show. Kudos to you guys of really featuring pharmacists that are doing lots of different types of investing. And I think that can help people get an idea of, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about that, or some of the pros of this strategy and cons of that strategy as well. Which takes me to my third objection, David, which is, I heard so-and-so on the YFP Real Estate Investing podcast, and that's awesome for them, but that feels so far out of reach of what I think I can do. So, I heard, Jared, or I heard the pharmacist investor talk about the portfolio they've been building and all of the processes and systems and teams that they have in place. And I'm just trying to get started with my first one, and it feels really overwhelming. And maybe this whole real estate investing thing just isn't for me. Talk us through this common objection.
Yeah, there's a real pro and con to hearing some of those major success stories, because on one hand, we hope that, and one of the things that we say on all the podcasts is we hope that we're after some education and some inspiration for people to take that jump and to get into their first property or to try that on for size and see if it's for them, if that's what they want to do. But then, yeah, when you hear some of these killer success stories of someone that made $100,000 on a flip, or where they bought 20 houses in a year or something like that, like those kind of things then start to get intimidating too. And you start to think, well, I don't know that I can make $100,000 on a flip. I've never flipped a house before. And so that intimidation can set in. So I think you're right. There's something about like backing off of that, not like understanding that folks that share their best win of every game that they've played on a podcast, that isn't necessarily reflective of their first deal, their average deal, their mediocre still win out there. And so setting aside some of those comparison things can be helpful to make sure that it's not delaying someone's start.
Yeah, and you've really got to hold this line, right? I remember, several years ago, started listening to the Bigger Pockets podcast, which shout out to, the great content they have and the platform community they've built. And I would feel the highs and lows of those emotions, right? You'd feel the high of the education, the examples, the stories. It was like those light bulbs going off of, I had no idea about this or that opportunity. And then right behind that would be the fear of, oh my gosh, like where do I start, right? That seems so overwhelming. And so, I think that's where the community, that's where the accountability, that's where that focus on the first property can be so valuable. And as you mentioned, David, some of the pros and cons that can come from, certainly sharing some of those stories from other individuals. So Nate, I mean, real estate investing, to David's comment, we often see, some of the glamorous things. There's certainly lots of YouTube stars that are out there, right? That are doing this that can further worsen this. What's your advice for how we hold this line?
Yeah, I think something to keep in perspective is just like what David was alluding to, is that, the norm is not to have a ton of these properties. And really one of the things we try to advocate for during our podcast episodes is you don't have to leave pharmacy to just do real estate full time. You don't have to be a millionaire real estate investor. If you look at I'll pull a stat here for you from roofstock.com, 16.7 million properties in the United States are owned by mom and pop landlords with one or two properties each. Meaning this is just somebody adding extra rental property to their portfolio, maybe two, that they're using that to supplement their long-term retirement plans, right? So you're buying a property, you're doing that early in your 30s, maybe even in your 40s, you're sticking a 30-year mortgage on that, and then you've got a paid off property in retirement, right? That's kind of what a lot of people are doing, actually. It's not these huge takeovers of real estate portfolios. So don't compare yourself to those people that are doing that. if that's not your goal. So really taking that into perspective and trying to reset that expectation can be helpful.
That's a really good reminder. And I'm glad you shared that stat, Nate, because I think it does feel like that surprises me, when I hear that number, because it does feel through listening to podcasts, reading books, reading, real estate blogs, it feels like that would be the minority, not the majority in terms of folks that, only own, one or two properties and have that long-term strategy in mind. So that's a good reminder, I think of really taking a step back and what is truly the market out there of how folks are investing. Nate, number 4, objection number 4, market's red hot. You know this all too well as an agent and the work that you're doing with clients in that capacity. The market's red hot and I'm worried about buying at the peak. You know what? Maybe I should just wait and kind of let this be a thing into the future. Talk to us about really trying to invest in real estate and this issue of timing based on, what's going on in the market.
Yeah, it's super tough. I mean, real estate market is still up. I think I was just looking at stats the other day and it was something like 17% increase in home prices year over year already.
Sheesh.
And that's on top of what we saw in 2020. So, I mean, we're seeing huge increases in home prices. Things are still flying off the shelves in multiple markets around the country. I just heard of an agent yesterday that there was a property listed on the market. It was, by all accounts, about falling down, and it had 5 offers by the second afternoon of it being on the market. It's like, so it's a tough time to jump in. I think the trick is that no one has a crystal ball. There's no way to time the market. And so waiting for it to do what you want just means that you end up waiting.
Mm-hmm.
I think the better play, and again, we're not trying to convince anybody to do anything either direction, is to make sure the numbers work no matter what. And if you can do that, it doesn't matter what the market is doing, right? If it goes down, but you've built in that cushion and that base, you'll be fine. If it goes up, fantastic news. So the goal is not to try to time the market, right? I don't buy a property and think, oh man, if I buy this now, I'll be in good shape. But if in 6 months, no one can figure that out. But if you can go in and look at it from a very objective perspective and say, the numbers work even if there's a small downturn, and the numbers work even better if there's an upturn, then you just commit to it and go for it.
And David, as someone who's been at this for, longer than a decade, you've seen certainly the dips and, where many folks were jumping in and buying properties that have obviously appreciated significantly. And then you're in the midst right now as an active investor trying to navigate, this hot market. Talk to us about it from your perspective.
Yeah, I think what's wild about that is that, we bought our first house as a live-in flip a little more than a decade ago, but we still haven't really seen, we haven't personally lived through a down market because it's been that long, which then I think a lot of people are saying that's probably overdue. And if you ask people that lived through that 2006, 7, 8, they probably still feel those scars of where the market really turned. And so I think that that's a reality of investing in general, is that, the stock market, as an example, has some average returns that are positive if you look at big enough ranges, but in any given year, that's not necessarily a guarantee.
Yeah.
I think real estate is a little different still because it's not quite as liquid. It's not like I could just go into an app somewhere and sell some index funds and 5 minutes later it's done, right? You definitely can't do that with a house. So I think if your goals are to buy that property and hold it for 20 or 30 years, that's a much different conversation than if you want to buy a rental. I want to try it for 6 months. I want to sell it, particularly when you think about the costs of transacting real estate.
Yeah.
So taxes, fees, realtor commissions, all those kind of things. So I think there's definitely some downside that we all need to keep in mind if there are thoughts of a market decline. And I don't know what anyone's crystal ball is saying this week. We may see that or we may not. But one of the things that I keep thinking in this market is that saying that I've heard lately of when's the best time to buy a rental property? 20 years ago. When's the second best time? Today. If you really have that long-term perspective of owning rental property, if you're buying right, today still may be a good time to do that.
That's great stuff. And the reason I brought this one forward is I think especially for folks that, are feeling overwhelmed by some of the other objections we've already talked about, looking at a market like we're in right now can be an easy opt out, right? Of there's all these things, but also the market's, where it's at. And so I'm just going to kind of hold off. And I think, David, what you shared there is a good reminder of, what's the long-term horizon that we might have involved or in mind as we look at our investing goals and plan. David, objection number 5 is, I don't know how to build a real estate team. So, what I'm referring to here is often when I would hear other pharmacist investors or other investors at large talk about their experiences, people talk about connections and relationships they have with realtors that are, investor friendly agents, and contractors that they're comfortable working with, that they vetted, perhaps lawyers, relationships with lenders, right? They're a phone call away from many of these folks. And for those that are just getting started, I don't know where to start, and I don't know necessarily how to build the team and to build these relationships. Talk to us through that.
So for me, my story started with finding a great real estate agent that was then able to introduce me to other people around that could be a great team. And I know that there's definitely that perspective out there where like I need to have 3 contractors and backup contractors and 2 lawyers and like all these people lined up before I even go walk a first house for the first time. And I certainly understand, particularly from the personality of the pharmacist that wants to dot all the I's and cross all the T's very carefully and very methodically. I definitely get that. And particularly if you're taking on a really risky scenario, like if you were jumping into a house with a major rehab need, like I can definitely see some hesitation in that. But for us, we found comfort in just buying a more standard house that didn't really need a ton of work, not trying to get in over our heads on our first transaction, and just finding a great realtor that could recommend great people. And then from there, kind of learning that network too. So talking with that contractor to meet other contractors, talking with the lender that our realtor introduced us to find even contractors from there. Networking with the local real estate investors association that we were then introduced to, and meeting accountants and attorneys and other lenders and other contractors, other wholesalers. And so just getting to know a bunch of people kind of methodically in just that organic growth process, rather than going out there and feeling like if I don't have 20 people that I can call on a first name basis and text for a quick response, I can't jump into any of this. But no, just starting off with who's that realtor that I know can help me build that team.
Yeah, and this is one of the things I'm so excited about, what you guys have built in the Facebook group, the YFP Real Estate Investing Facebook group, and the community at large focused and interested on this topic. Is we're seeing a lot of, hey, I'm an investor in Buffalo, and I see you're a pharmacist investor there as well. Would you happen to know, so and so, right? And they can build those relationships through referrals. You mentioned the value and power of networking, and I think it becomes a lot more comfortable when I can connect with another pharmacist who has worked with somebody, or another investor that I know and trust that has worked with somebody and built those relationships for those referrals. So Nate, David mentioned a couple times the value in starting with a good realtor who really can then help shepherd some of those other relationships. You wouldn't happen to know one, would you, by any chance?
Hey, if you're in Cleveland, Ohio, give me a call. No, really, this is why we launched, the YFP Home Buying Concierge, and then eventually the Real Estate Investor Concierge, where you can go and get an investor-friendly agent, because we found so much value for everyone that we've talked to that's where it all starts from. Like, if you don't know how to build a team, that's okay. Take one step forward. And a lot of times that one step is a really good real estate agent, because they're going to be that Rolodex of people that you need to tap into the different avenues. So again, if you go to yfprealestate.com, you can tap on find an investor-friendly agent, connect with me, and we'll actually get somebody local in your area. And again, the cool thing about working with an agent is that, especially if you're a buyer or an investor, there's no cost to doing it. Like, it's a free person basically to walk you through all the steps that you need to understand, give you access to the resources that you need, and be someone that can give you some advice along the way. So again, we really advocate for that. It's exactly why we have the service available, because that's a really great starting point for a lot of people.
And we will link to that in the show notes for folks that want to connect with Nate to learn more and have some further discussion. Would highly recommend looking at that further. So those are 5 common objections that, certainly are things that I've thought of. I suspect many other pharmacists might be thinking about, have been barriers to getting started. I want to shift gears here and talk about some of the takeaways that you guys have had now that you're 40 plus episodes into the YFP Real Estate Investing podcast. You've interviewed many pharmacist investors, connected with others beyond that. I suspect there's been some positive takeaways, not only for you guys individually, but also in seeing some of the wins of that community and growth of this niche of pharmacists that are interested in real estate investing. So Nate, I'll start with you. As you guys are now more than 40 episodes in, back to April 2021 when the podcast started, what have been some of your takeaways from the podcast and the launch of some of the YFP real estate investing initiatives?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me as I look back is all of the really interesting ways that pharmacists are doing this. I think when David and I started developing the concept of this podcast and what it was going to look like, I think in my head it was going to be a bunch of people coming on talking about their long-term rental they have down the street, and it's like their one piece of it. But there are pharmacists doing things from commercial to mortgage lending to, we're going to have this little spoiler down the road, we're going to have somebody on the podcast here in a little bit who bought a motel and what that looked like. So I mean, there's all these really cool stories of pharmacists doing things that I never would have expected. And it's just been so great talking to them and hearing their stories and how they got there, because it's all a little bit different, but all remarkably the same in terms of, I had this problem, I started looking into it, and here's how I solved it, and here's what my life looks like right now. And that's just been so fun for me to see how those people do that and connect with a community that shares one thing in common, but ultimately shares much more than that.
David, what about for you?
So one of the things that I've found is getting out of my own head and getting into community with others is just so critical, whether that's real estate investing or even all of our shared experience in pharmacy school, where we probably all had that, like walking in a group from class to class and things like that, finding people to study together. And that just helps to kind of keep you grounded and keep you focused on what's important. So there's so much that I think can be overwhelming, whether it's pharmacy school, whether it's real estate investing, whatever you're trying to learn. And that community is helpful. And not just a community of people that are interested in that topic, but community of people with some shared experiences. So it's just been so fun to hear pharmacists on this podcast, pharmacists that are all wired similarly in terms of personalities, pharmacists that all value their career that they've invested heavily in, where they aren't really trying to quit their jobs to be full-time investors, like I think is common in a lot of other channels out there, but pharmacists that just want to reimagine what life could be if they had additional income streams or a more diversified retirement plan. And so it's just seeing that diversity of pharmacists and non-pharmacist guests as well it's been a lot of fun to see that community grow. I think if I could sneak a second takeaway that I've had in there is that, and I think we alluded to this earlier, but there's no value statement on goals. I think we've seen some really unique goals that pharmacists have brought. I think that talking with Blake and Zach early on and how they're buying house after house after house and at kind of rapid speed as they're trying to grow something there is a very different experience than when Eric Geyer came on and talked about what he's doing with real estate investing, small number of deals, something that he doesn't have to spend a lot of time on. And so it's, having one rental house can be a great goal. 2 could be a great goal. 100 could be a great goal. That there's not necessarily a value statement in one goal is good or a goal is bad, but just seeing pharmacists set those goals and achieve those goals has just been a lot of fun and really inspiring.
And kudos to you guys for bringing those guests on, asking good questions, right? Which allows folks to really tell and share their story and some of the motivation and why behind what they're doing. And certainly a recognition of the time that goes into doing those episodes, planning for those episodes. And I certainly think it's adding a ton of value to the YFP community at large. So thank you very much to you guys for that. Nate, 2022, you're again, we're 40 plus episodes in. Obviously, I feel like we're just kind of scratching the surface of some of the opportunity and education in this area. What can we expect? What's ahead for 2022 when it comes to the real estate investing podcast and some of those efforts for the community?
Yeah, I think we've got a lot planned. I'm pretty excited about. I think the biggest thing on my mind right now is, as we're about to launch, is our none-to-one coaching program. So if you've seen anything about this in the Facebook group or heard about it on the podcast, the goal here was basically to say, how can we take our community who is right on that edge, right? They are pretty ready to buy a house. They just need that motivation to kind of get to the finish line or to answer a couple of questions. And so how do we take them from no real estate investing at all, to that first house? And so we launched this coaching program as sort of a beta test with a small cohort of individuals. We just had our kind of final applications due and acceptances go out, and really excited to see where that takes us. And if we can get everybody over that line and actually buying their first rental property, that'll be really fun to see.
And I'm really looking forward to hearing some of the output, and I suspect some of the success stories that are going to come from that group, not only going from none to one, but perhaps even some of the future growth that will come for those individuals. And I sense the motivation it will provide for the rest of the community as well. So really appreciate you guys and the efforts that you've provided. As we wrap up here, I would point folks in a few directions. If you're not yet listening to the YFP Real Estate Investing Podcast, I hope you will tune in each and every Saturday. Nate and David are bringing you a new episode. If you're not also yet a part of the YFP Real Estate Investing Facebook group, I hope you'll take a moment to join that community, and we will link to that and both of these in the show notes. And finally, David and Nate put together a great guide just about a year ago as these initiatives were started, the Pharmacist Guide to Real Estate Investing. We have that available for download for free at yfprealestate.com. David and Nate, thank you guys so much for joining, and looking forward to an awesome 2022.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks so much.
As we conclude this week's podcast, an important reminder that the content on this show is provided to you for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. Information in the podcast and corresponding materials should not be construed as a solicitation or offer to buy or sell any investment or related financial products. We urge listeners to consult with a financial advisor with respect to any investment. Furthermore, the information contained in our archived newsletters, blog posts, and podcasts is not updated and may not be accurate at the time you listen to it on the podcast. Opinions and analyses expressed herein are solely those of your financial pharmacist unless otherwise noted, and constitute judgments as of the dates published. Such information may contain forward-looking statements which are not intended to be guarantees of future events. Actual results could differ materially from those anticipated in the forward-looking statements. For more information, please visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer. Thank you again for your support of the Your Financial Pharmacist podcast. Have a great rest of your week.